Margaret Hartley never planned to become a mother in her late 50s, but sometimes life's most important decisions aren't planned, they're felt. On a crisp autumn afternoon 27 years ago, she walked into the city orphanage with nothing more than a box of donated blankets, a few storybooks, and a bag of homemade cookies. She'd volunteered here for years, but that day was different. In the corner of the playroom, a little girl with tangled curls and wary eyes sat alone, absently tracing circles into the worn wooden table. Her name was Lila, 6 years old, already carrying the weight of too much loss. The staff explained she'd been shuttled between foster homes since she was a toddler, labeled to withdrawn and difficult to place. Margaret saw something else, a quiet resilience, a spark buried beneath the shyness. She asked to spend some time with her, and when Lila shyly reached for a cookie without meeting her eyes, something inside Margaret clicked into place. One visit became two became weekly, and before long, Margaret was filling out adoption papers. Friends called her brave. Others whispered that it was reckless for a single woman her age, but Margaret didn't care. She needs someone who won't leave, she told them. The first year wasn't easy. Lila had nightmares, hid under her bed during thunderstorms, and flinched at sudden movements. Margaret, patient as ever, read bedtime stories until Lila drifted off, baked cookies to fill the house with warmth, and took her on long walks through Vermont's golden fields to show her the world could be safe. Slowly, the walls around the little girl began to crack. By the time Lila was in middle school, she was devouring books on science and anatomy. Inspired by the time she had nursed Margaret through a minor stroke, she talked about becoming a doctor one day. Margaret would smile and tell her, "You can be anything." Through high school and into college, Lila worked part-time jobs, won scholarships, and never forgot who had believed in her first. Margaret never asked for repayment. "You owe me nothing," she would say, brushing off any attempt at thanks. But deep down, Lila carried a quiet vow, a promise, that one day, in a way that truly mattered, she would give back to the woman who had given her everything. The years passed quickly, and before either of them realized, Lila was standing in a white coat, a stethoscope draped around her neck, her medical degree freshly earned after years of relentless study. Margaret, now in her 80s, had grown frail. Her once quick steps slowed, but her mind still sharp enough to beam with pride every time she introduced Lila as "my daughter, the doctor." They had settled into a cozy rhythm, Margaret tending her garden and reading on the porch, while Lila worked long shifts at the hospital, always coming home with a warm meal in hand and stories to share. But one rainy evening, Margaret collapsed in the kitchen. The diagnosis came swiftly: congestive heart failure, and she would need a complicated surgery if she wanted to live much longer. Lila's heart sank, the thought of losing the woman who had saved her once feeling unbearable. Margaret, ever stubborn, insisted she didn't want to be a burden, and doubted she could survive the operation. But Lila refused to let fear win. Pulling strings through colleagues and former professors, she secured one of the best cardiac surgeons in the country and arranged for Margaret's treatment at no cost. An unspoken thank you that came from years of sacrifice and love. She took leave from her job, sleeping in a chair beside her mother's hospital bed, monitoring her vitals herself, speaking to her in the same soothing tone Margaret once used on her as a frightened child. The surgery was long, but successful. When Margaret awoke, groggy and confused, she saw Lila's tear-streaked smile and whispered, "Why did you do all this?" Lila took her hand and said softly, "Because 27 years ago, you saved my life. I'm just returning the favor." From that moment, Margaret seemed to grow stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. The two of them spent the following months traveling to places they had once only dreamed of: sunsets in Santorini, cherry blossoms in Kyoto, the quiet charm of an Irish countryside cottage. And everywhere they went, Lila made sure Margaret never lifted a suitcase, never worried about the bill, and always felt like the most cherished person in the world. It wasn't just repayment, it was a celebration of a love that had defied time, circumstance, and the doubts of everyone who once thought they wouldn't last. Asterisk.